In this video, I will try to very concisely go through what we did in class today on August 21st. We took our time and discussed various ways of doing things, but here I'll just be more straightforward. I've already pre-populated a lot of the labels that we used, and we talked about how one way to auto-fit column A would be to double-click here. But we said, no, that makes it too wide because of this big long label up top. So we undid that, selected only the cells that we were interested in, Control Shift down a couple times. I did an Alt-HOI or an Alt-HOI, and it auto-fit the columns that we selected. Then we talked about a model where potential inputs could be 52 pay periods per year, $1,000 a week, and 3 allowances for you to use on your homework. We modeled them as inputs with Alt-HJ in input. And then we said, well, how would we calculate the annual gross pay? Well, that would be the pay periods times the gross pay per period, which is an output, so Alt-HJ output. And then another output would be Social Security withholding, but for that, we need to come up here and put in the Social Security tax rate of 6.2% and the Social Security wage base of 128,000. I think I missed the 400 in section 1, and a Medicare tax rate of 1.45%. I'm going to highlight these 3 cells and do an Alt-HOI. Let's go ahead and consider those inputs because those are parameters that might change in the future. Alt-HJ inputs. And then the Social Security withholding we would calculate as 3 ways to calculate that. I think the most elegant is probably the Social Security tax rate times the lesser of the wage base or the annual gross pay. Other ways to calculate that I'm going to paste in below and you can look at them. Then to calculate the Medicare withholding, that's just the straight Medicare tax rate times the annual gross pay. These are also outputs, so I'm going to label them as such, Alt-HJ, format them as such. Now the effective withholding rate is just the withholding divided by the annual gross pay. I'll hit F4 for dollar sign so I can copy that down. Shift up arrow, Alt-HJ to format those as outputs. Also Alt-HP to format them as percent. Alt-HO a couple of times to get some decimal places in there. And this is our model, and it shows that if we doubled our salary, we'd be withholding twice as much and the withholding rates would be the same. If we tripled that salary from 1,000, we'd triple the withholding, the Medicare rate would stay the same, and the effective rate would stay the same, and that's what matters to us. I'm sorry, the effective rate of Social Security withholding would go down because that's a regressive tax. Set that back to 1,000. Then we said, let's look at all kinds of possibilities. Let's look at sensitivities to what if our weekly pay were 200 or 400. Or let's highlight those, grab the mouse, drag that down to about 4,000. And look at all the sensitivities to that. We'll highlight these. Put that mouse down. We'll highlight these with a Control Shift right and an Alt-HOI. And now we can calculate, we can get this data table that we're about to create to calculate all these different items by the sensitivity of putting these different weekly pay amounts into the gross pay per period. So the annual pay output needs to be B12. Medicare withholding is B14. Medicare tax rate is C14. Social Security withholding is B13, and Social Security tax rate is C13. Then we select all of those cells using Control-Shift arrows, Alt-DT or Alt-AWG as you prefer. And since our inputs here are in a column, we're going to completely ignore the row input cell, go to the column input cell, and point it at B7. When we hit OK, then we get all the sensitivities that we expected. We see that Social Security withholding increases as our pay goes up from 200 to 400 to 600 per week. But when it gets to about 2,400, 2,600 per week, which equates to 128,000 per year, then we stop taking out Social Security withholding, and the effective Social Security rate begins to go down. So a high-income person making $208,000 a year pays a lower Social Security rate than a low-income person making $10,000 a year. Now that we have the data table complete, we can use it to create a chart. The chart on the board had annual pay on the x-axis, not weekly pay, so we'll start by selecting the annual pay. And I think the easiest way to do this is to just select the one next to it, and then we'll hit Alt-N for the insert ribbon. D gets us to this little icon that gives us scatter plots, and then the right arrow a couple of times gives us a chart that has lines but no symbols. And we'll hit Enter. Move this chart out of the way. Hit the green plus sign so we can get our axis titles, and let's throw a legend on there. I don't think I did this in class, certainly not with section 1, but now we have a legend on there as well. So axis title needs to be annual wages for the horizontal axis title. For the vertical axis title, it needs to be withholding. And after we add another series, we'll come back and add a secondary axis title. Now this chart, this line, if I forgot what it was, I can click on it and I can see that the X data is the annual pay and the Y data is the Medicare withholding. So I'd like to change the name of that series. There are 3 ways I can do that. The easiest is to click right here and click right here. And what it does, this is a formula for series, and that's a way to put the name in. I'll go into more detail on that in a later video. So if I hit Enter, it shows Medicare withholding as the name of that series. I'll Control Z to undo it. Right click, select the data, edit series 1, and then I can give it the series name here by selecting that cell. Now in both of those, I said there were 3 ways to do it, I guess there were 4. In both of those, I could have typed in the word. Notice that now when I click on the line, it's got a formula referring to where the series title is. I could have just typed that in quotes, and it would use the string I typed in. That's pretty analogous to breaking modeling rule 1, so I'm going to Control Z and undo that. And we'll just refer it to that cell. We'll do more on that in the future. Today we're just kind of getting introduced to the chart. So we want to add our other withholding to the chart. That would be our Social Security withholding. We certainly don't want to copy this top row. This is just the part of the data table that referred us to the correct output. So we'll grab everything below that, click on the top cell, Control-Shift down, Control-C to copy, click on the chart. Now be sure not to click down here, that'll mess us up. Click on the corner of the chart where we have only the outside of the chart selected. And then we want to get up here to Paste Special. So we'll do an Alt-H, V for Paste, and S for Paste Special. And then we get this dialog box. I think we went through this in detail in both sections. We're not extending this line with new points, we're actually giving it a new series that will maybe have a different color and a new name in the legend. The area that we selected was in columns. That would matter if we had more than one column selected. That could be a legitimate question. Series names are not in the first row. If we were able to go all the way up to row 5, series names could be in the first row, but they're not. And the category X's, X values, are not in the first column. We only have one column in its Y data. So when we hit OK, now we have the withholding for the Social Security. So this time I'm going to do it the quick way. I'm going to click on the chart. I'm going to click in this right between that parentheses and the comma, and then I'm going to click on the name and hit enter. I guess it's probably worth explaining right now what this series formula does. When I click on one series or the other, the chart is using the series formula to get 4 pieces of information. The first piece is the name of the series that's going to go into the legend. The second piece is the X data, and so that's our annual pay. The third piece is the Y data, and the fourth piece is the order in which it shows up. So how would I change the order of these two? If I wanted Social Security withholding on top, I could click on that, change this 2 to a 1, making it the first series, and now it's on top. Control Z to undo that. If I wanted to plot these lines using X data of weekly pay, I could grab this box and move it, and then come over here and grab this box and move it. And now we're plotted against weekly pay. We didn't change our title name, so I'm going to hit Control Z 2 times to undo that. But hopefully you get the idea that a formula for a series on a graph has some parameters that I can move around with my mouse, just like a formula for a number in a spreadsheet has some things I can move around. I can move these boxes by clicking and dragging with my mouse. Anyway, back to the task at hand. We've now made a chart that has our Medicare and our Social Security withholding versus annual wages. Let's come over here and add the Medicare rate. Copy. Click on the chart, Alt H V S. It's a new series in columns with no row name or X values, so we can hit OK or say enter. And it's all the way down here at the bottom of the chart. It's going to be hard to click on that without clicking on the wrong thing. I'm going to use my shortcut to add the series name. Shortcut's a bad word there. I'm going to use my trick to add the series name, and it changed series 3 to Medicare rate. Now we'll come and do the same thing with Social Security rate. Copy, click on the chart, Alt E S V, and it's a new series in columns with no name and X. I know every time we keep hitting OK, but it's still worth checking every time. And then if I wanted to click on that, it did in fact give me series 4, so I was lucky I can go ahead and add the name. Sometimes, since series 3 and series 4 are on top of each other, it might be hard to click the right one. The way we need to fix that is to zoom in. These percentages are such small numbers when plotted against these thousands of dollars that they go to the bottom. So let's click on a series. In fact, let's right click on a series, Format Data Axis, Format Data Series, excuse me, and choose Secondary Axis. Then let's come over to the other withholding rate, Format Data Series, and choose Secondary Axis. And I guess it's kind of unfortunate how those cross. I'm going to change the scale of this just a little bit by clicking first on the number on the secondary axis, and then next on this bar chart icon, go to axis options, and let's move that up to about 10%. Okay, now we have a relatively busy graph, but it's getting better. And while we're at it, let's change the format of the numbers on those axes to a percent. Notice when we're working in charts, there pretty much are no keyboard shortcuts. Let's go add now an axis title for the secondary vertical axis. And let's call that withholding rates. And so maybe if we make our rates dashed lines, we click on the bucket of paint, make the dash type like that, come over here to the Medicare rate, make the dash type like that. Now it shows that Social Security rate is flat until it becomes regressive, and that the Medicare rate is flat forever. And then our absolute withholding dollar numbers match up with that. Why don't we go ahead and change our withholding dollar numbers, come back to the number and make that, let's make it accounting, and then give it no decimal places, 0 decimal places. And do the same thing on the annual wages. Currency might have been a better choice, but accounting works very well too. I think I'll right click on this legend, see if it looks any better on the bottom. Yeah, I believe it does. So let's go with that. That's essentially what we did in class today. And so your challenge now is to see if you can come down here and create a federal income tax. Spell it better than I did. And find the withholding and the percentage on that. I might give you some hints in the following video. But for now, let's leave that there. By the way, these were just here to show that there were 3 different ways to calculate that regressive tax. And it would be good for you to look at those 3 closely, make sure they all give you the same number, and be ready for that on the quiz, because that would make a great quiz or exam question to see if you could do that calculation with an if statement or with a min or max statement.